I'm going to talk about pricing models today. Once you've got past the typical problems of confidence and trying to come up with what you think is fair and valuable to you, you have to look at pricing as a strategic tool. And you really have to know the costs going into your business. I have a really close friend who's a photographer. He shoots well over 30 some years. He shot over 2.5 million kids. Big teams, all kinds of stuff. And I asked him one day what the cost of a 5x7 was that he has on his website. It says $1.99. He says, oh, it's 5 cents. He says, I make a pile of money on these 5x7s. So I said, okay, tell me what goes into the cost. Well, what goes into the cost, he wasn't taking into consideration. He has his overhead, he has his employees, he has marketing, he has sales incentives, he's got kickbacks to associations to give him work, he's got all this stuff. We found out that he's probably making 10 cents, not $1.94. So that's one of the worst things that could possibly happen to you, and that's just a function of planning. For pricing, you have to set goals. Let's, for an instance, say you're making widgets. Everybody knows what that mysterious widget is. Would you prefer to sell 100 of them at $10, or would you prefer to sell one of them at $1,000? If you take into account the market, the quality of your product or service, and all that stuff, is it better to make a higher price than go for a smaller price? I certainly would imagine that buying a Rolls-Royce for $250,000 might be a little more difficult than selling 1,000 Hyundais. But in the right market, of course, you're going to sell Rolls-Royces. Dubai, Saudi Arabia. That's what they all drive over there, isn't it? In your pricing model, determining your pricing model, you have to know what the competition is charging. Now, there's ways of doing that. I prefer to pretend I'm a customer, go in a store and shop, see what their selling products are what they're selling them for. Or why don't you go and call the competition, pretend you're a customer asking for a quote. Or better still, have a friend do it so you don't get caught in some big lie. There's a great book that I've referenced before called Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and in it he talks about fighting battles and how it's important to send spies into the enemy camp. And that's what you're doing. You're sending a spy into the enemy camp to determine what the prices of things are going for. Determining costs are by far the hardest and certainly the most important thing to do. You can't sell a widget for 10 bucks if it costs you 11 to make it. So you have to know everything that goes into the pricing model. And that's taking into account salaries and fixed costs and variable costs and all that stuff. When you get down to the actual pricing, are you going to bill by the hour? Are you going to bill by the job? What about those non-billable hours that disappear as you're preparing for a sales call, or the days on the phone, or the meetings to negotiate? I used to think that I was doing really well in my photography business years ago, but I was shooting about 8 hours to 10 hours a week in a 40-hour week, as if 40-hour weeks are standard. But in a 40-hour week, I was working 32 hours on providing a product or service, and 8 hours actually doing it. So $300 an hour, that's what I had to charge to make to pay for my overhead, my rent, my staff, and all that stuff. You also have to consider industry standards. If you're an average photographer, let's say, keeping that same analogy, if the industry is charging $100 an hour because digital has screwed the market up, then it's unlikely you're going to get a lot of work by charging $300 and you're just an average photographer. So industry standards are really important. Going back to that same problem, I used to shoot weddings back years ago, and digital was just coming in. And there was a lot of freelancers working from home, which caused a few problems. Competition, we didn't want those guys. So I would make $5,000 to $10,000 shooting a wedding. Well, what happened is mom and pop at home decided that they would give the instead of giving the negatives, they would give the flash drives on a disc, on a CD, and they do the whole thing for $1,000 bucks. Well, what do you think that does to a market? It just screwed up the pricing model. When you're looking at your product, okay, let's say there's two widgets, one's yours and one's a competition. Is yours better? If it's a service, are you faster? Are you more reliable? Those are taken into account when you're deciding your pricing model too. I had a funny story as a commercial photographer. I went to a business to quote on a job that would take me 5 or 6 hours. And I said, well, it's going to cost you $2,000. He says, oh my gosh, that's way too much. My budget's not that great. I said, wait a minute, I can help you. I was using a bigger camera with a much bigger negative for that $2,000. But you might be able to get away with a Hasselblad, which is a smaller lens, super high quality. I can do that for $1,800. He says, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I have one more option for you. Let's go with my Nikon 35mm. I'll shoot it for $1,600. Oh, you can do that for me? He was overjoyed. I went out thinking I had a great deal. He thought he had a great deal. And I chuckled to myself as I'm going to my car because my quote was $1,600. I started high, worked myself down. I knew I could get away with the job shooting a smaller camera. And everybody was happy. I got what I wanted. Now, pricing is definitely a strategy, so you must come to terms with adding up your costs, your competition, your niche, the industry standards, your distribution channels. Oh boy, he's throwing in another one now. What's a distribution channel? Distribution channel is it a store? Is it retail? Or is it an online situation? So that should give you a little bit of heads up on a pricing model. Next, I'll be talking about the different types of pricing.